Tutu, tell me where the people going today. Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. They go down Mākua, bring more tupu and pray. They're going down Mākua, bring more tupu and pray. Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Take my hand and follow.
Aloha, I'm Karen Young, and I'm hosting this part 2 of the update on Mākua Valley. At our last program, we ended with the settlement agreement and some key features of that agreement, one of which was the EIS would be required to be done by the U.S. Army in 3 years. Otherwise, they could not resume live fire training. But do you want to comment further on that?
Well, yeah. The agreement is that they would have X amount of live fire training scenarios, of which they didn't use all of them, but they were able to do it. So they got benefit. After 3 years, they still did not complete the EIS. So that was one of the key things. That's why they still haven't gone back to training. And and some of the other elements of the agreement was besides the EIS.
Right. Well, let me just comment on that thing that that they didn't finish the EIS, and according to our lawyer in Earth Justice, David Henkin, he discovered that they had put the EIS on Mākua on the back burner, so to speak, because they wanted to get the Striker vehicle
that's right.
EIS done first, which it was and eventually passed. But that was one of the reasons that they delayed. But one of the problems for them was that they couldn't train because it was part of the agreement. And one of the commanders, one of the generals who came in said, well, this is ridiculous, we got to have training. And he went to ask Judge Mulway to allow training. And Judge Mulway said, and I'm paraphrasing of course, why? What is it that you need this training? You had an agreement. And they said, oh, national security, thinking the judge would say, oh, okay. But she didn't. She said, well, prove it to me. Where's the national security element here that you need to resume training and break your agreement? And apparently the Army couldn't prove that. And she said, no, you have to stick to the original agreement. So basically, they haven't trained for 8 years.
Oh, excellent.
They haven't used, yeah.
Excellent.
But another, like Sparky was saying, another element of this settlement agreement was that they have to do some clearing of unexploded ordnance, what we call UXO. So this is unusual because they considered an active range then, and they usually don't clean up active ranges until they close the range. But this is
like I mentioned earlier, the range rules state that if any weapon can be used, and as long as it's used for its intended purpose, it's not considered a hazardous waste until they go back and touch it. So they had problems with this part of the agreement initially, but because they really wanted to train, this was right after 9/11, that we were able to get that. And they were going to clear all the way, I think it was 1,000 meters or 1,200 meters
1,000 meters
into the valley. And that was pretty much the kill radius if something went off.
Right.
And that expanded over the beach as well as the road, Farrington Highway, where we go.
People
and
are,
our kids
yeah.
are, yes.
Yep. Yep.
So that's
So they
remarkable,
had
actually,
to do
that was in the settlement agreement.
And you know, during one of the burns in the valley, a 1,000-pound bomb was discovered. That's a big bugger. And we have a picture of it. And we have a picture of it before detonation, and then the series of detonations that occurred, and then the after, the big hole that it left. And I might say that we got these pictures, at least the detonation pictures, by having a good friend of ours take us out on the boat, and we took it from out at sea.
Well, there was also, I was across the valley, it was about 1.5 miles across, at the Koyahi Firebreak Road. when they detonated it. So I also had a camera there
Oh,
videotaping.
Yeah,
that
but
part of
Interesting.
that's another detonation.
But that was a 1,000-pound bomb.
Yeah, it might have been another. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know you were there for an earlier one, but this is this 1,000-pound bomb that I thought you were on the boat with us. With
No.
Uncle Jim. Okay.
Well, I know the
Your wife was. She was taking
Well,
pictures.
the Coast Guard blocked off. The LNR had boats out there, and they kept people out of Mākua
Oh.
as well as out of the water,
Oh.
because that blast radius, a 1,000-pound bomb, would end up
Oh.
expanding
Oh.
fairly far.
I could feel it. It pushed us back.
Well,
when
we
we were
were
out on
with
the boat.
the EOD guys that set it off, and they were all the way across. So they had wrapped it with C4, and they had a remote control
Yeah.
detonator. And
Yeah.
while we were watching, being beyond a mile away, I felt the concussion
Wow.
as it came across the valley. and it was-
I can believe it, but I missed that one where you were at the Koiahi area. But that wasn't. They didn't allow that with this 1,000-pound bomb. Maybe because the position
It
was
was-
that it was
yeah,
was
might have been
too
too
close.
big.
Do you
Yeah.
know approximate year? Because you
Yeah.
have a note about a burn. Is that connected to the
Not that- well,
2003 burn?
It might have
somehow?
been. It might have. Well, no. That burn was a burn that occurred in the area of the Ukanipo Heiau. And this 1,000-pounder was not too far from there.
Yeah.
And we had
Wow.
concerns about it.
And we'd have to go in. We were able to go and view that bomb.
Yes.
But we had to wear Kevlar
Right.
and a
Had a
flak
vest.
jacket.
Right, and a helmet and all that stuff.
1,000-pound bomb would leave very little trace of us if something.
Really. And if I can add, we got close enough. I could see the date on the bomb. There's a date, the date of
What was
fabrication.
the date? Do you remember?
1944 December 1944.
Wow.
So probably was dropped by an airplane in 45. So it was quite interesting. But that's a
But
slide that people can watch.
The thing is, you said the bomb was exposed. Did you say by a fire?
It
I'm sorry.
was.
Was that the 2003
No.
fire?
No, it was a fire that occurred in the Ukanipo area. I'm trying to remember the date. I think it was 2006, but
Oh.
don't hold me to that.
Yeah, I don't recall either. But what's interesting, you mentioned Ukanipo. Ukanipo was one of the features that was pretty dominant from the community's perspective, looking into the valley. And when we did research, the Army had archaeological surveys done by Rosendahl. And he said that this is only one site here, and there may have been something here, but that's all. And when I found out, he had 3 months to survey all the military's property in the state for archaeological sites.
3
so they
months?
could identify 3 months.
Yeah.
So Mākua, when it gets overgrown, when I first went to Ukanipo, it was like 7 feet of grass. A lot of it was, they call it fuel load, so that burns very hot and quickly. So when I first went to Ukanipo, it was very hard to see. After a burn, the entire heiau was exposed,
Wow.
as well as other walls and features throughout that part of the valley, that the rock looked like emo stone. Some of
Wow.
them were cracked, but they were it looked like emo stone. They're all colored and rainbow effect to it, and that's how intense the heat was. But the fires exposed that as well as the bomb. And I remember the bomb having an area of rust where you could see through and see the explosive material
wow.
below that. And that's just an indication that some of that chemicals was becoming exposed to our
Yeah.
environment
Right,
and leaching out.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Well, having been dropped in 45, the fins of the bomb had rusted off, so it looked like a big egg stuck in the ground.
Yeah.
And it's quite something. You know, we have had the Army do some clearing of UXO, which is
That's great.
what they're supposed to be doing.
And we mentioned two things: UXO's clearance, the 1,000-pound bomb, as well as fires. And there was a piece that I recorded at Gigi's farm, and this is done by Kyle
great.
That's right.
Great.
And it's a Mākua medley, and it talks about
That's true.
where we're going to go. It talks about fires. It shows one of our Easter sunrise accesses as we're walking into the valley. And it shows different parts of the valley, but a lot of the environmental images and shots. So if it's okay, can we play that now?
I'd love to see it.
It's a beautiful collage and a beautiful song done by our friend Kyle Kachihiron. Thank you for doing such a good video job on it. Yeah, so that would play right now.
Here it is.
Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. They're going down Mākua, bring ho kupu and pray. They're going down Mākua, bring ho kupu and pray. Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Take my hand and follow, this road is long and slow. Take my hand and follow, this road is long and slow. Tutu, when I get there, oh, what gifts shall I bring? Tutu, when I get there, oh, what gifts shall I bring? Come with aloha aina and a song to sing. Come with aloha aina and a song to sing. Oh, Tutu, wake up, they're burning her tonight. Oh, Tutu, wake up, they're burning her tonight. Oh, call everybody, tell them we must fight. Oh, call everybody and tell them we must fight. Oh, Tutu, show us the pono things to do. Tutu, can you show us the pono things to do? Inui kawai ava ava and it will come to you. Inui kawai ava ava and it will come to you. Oh, Mākua, tell us how to heal your pain. Oh, Mākua, tell us how to heal your pain. Look for the answer in the ulalena rain. Find the answer in the ulalena rain. E ho'o Mākua, soon you will be free. E ho'o Mākua, soon you will be free. Aina pula pula from the mountains to the sea. Aina lana kila from the mountains to the sea. Aina ika pono from the mountains to the sea. Aina ikea from the mountains to the sea.
Well, that was beautiful.
Well, Kyle did a really good job in creating that. He came up with the melody after he came back from
Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
He went to
the
Vieques, and he's seen,
It's-
and there was a kindred relationship between
Yes.
what was going on there, the people there, and what was going on in Waianae.
Excellent.
Yeah, he used the Spanish rhythm theme. It was
Yes.
excellent. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. And I like the scenery that you captured in the video.
Yeah.
It's great.
That
There was one section up in the above Mākua,
Uh-huh.
and this is an area where the Army Environmental has fenced off sections, and there's an area that has native forests.
Mm-hmm.
There was a ohia tree with a stump that was about this big around.
Wow.
Beautiful. And when you walk into this area, once they put fences up, was to keep the goats out. It was to protect the environment and the habitat for the native species. But when you walk into it, you could feel the difference.
Mm.
And looking at Mākua today, it doesn't seem possible that that could be that way all the way from mountain to ocean.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's something else.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
something to dream of.
But getting back to that, the agreement that we had,
right.
part of it was to have cultural access and monthly access. I was hoping that we could spend nights or spend evenings and just to see the different temperature changes and see how the wind behaves and the rain, and just to get a feel of what it was like 100, 200, 800 BC before Cook.
Just to be part of the
To be
valley.
part of that valley and to sense what they may have been feeling way back when.
Right.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah,
Look at
and for people who want to come on the access, we have a scroll going on that will let you know to give me a call and we can get you on there. It's twice a month. We have to have names into the Army at least 2 working days ahead of time.
Yeah.
So it's important not to call too late if you want to go on an access. And yeah, it's really, really beautiful. And I noticed that we have some other slides of Ko'iahi, which you had mentioned, and that's a little valley as you're looking at the up toward the mountains. It's a little valley on the right, and so we have one that we took from the Pico site. We have numbers for those sites, but we also have names. And then there's a telephoto of that area, so we can show those slides now. And then we have an ahu dedicated to Ko'iahi. We have 3 ahus in the valley, one dedicated to Ko'iahi. We have a picture of that. We have another one and a link to Mākua, and then another one to the left side of the valley, which is Kahana Haiki.
And this
So
is
we can show
some of
those.
the results of the settlement agreement as well.
Yeah,
The cultural access.
yeah, I think it is. Definitely is. And you know, there were other things. We had a $50,000 fund that the Army agreed to be able to help the community to evaluate the EIS
Yeah.
and prepare for it.
One of the things that happened in the past is that the military would pay a professional, PhD, to do some study. They would come out with a finding, and there would always be questions from the community's perspective. So the request for the funds was technical assistance, so we could
Right.
hire our own expert
Right.
to do a peer review. So a PhD would, sample and evaluate what that other PhD had done
Right.
and come up with a critique. And we found that so many things were done differently. And it's so easy, someone getting paid to come up with a certain outcome. And an environmental impact statement is one of the things that the people that are doing the survey or the evaluation decides the questions. So you can almost decide
That's true.
the outcome
Yep.
That's
by
true.
the questions you ask.
Right.
And that's one of the things over the years we've had a chance to learn, mostly from a lot of skinned knees and raw knuckles, being out there and just trying to understand and learn the process.
Yeah.
It's excellent.
You're right. The person who asks the questions has controls of the answers, and it's.
So we've been asking a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions.
What are some of the other, I don't recall all of the,
The
I know,
settlement
yeah.
agreements,
There's
there's,
the slide
there's a
again.
slide
You could
with
look
all
at the
the-
slide and
I was
Will's-
just trying to pick out the ones that
Right.
sort of seem to have
Exactly.
impact.
which one stood out to you? As
Well, the
being,
EIS,
That's certainly
the requirement for the EIS
Yeah.
by a certain date, there's a deadline,
yeah.
and which they didn't meet. And then the requirement for the Fish and Wildlife to say when training can occur, green, red.
Yeah, they
yellow.
did have to follow certain rules.
And
yes.
so just by that alone, I think there was more outside control as to when training can occur.
Yeah.
And I think that helps a lot.
Well, and,
And it's hopefully a neutral.
of course the access and the Makahiki
Yeah, and of
things
course
are
that
important.
too. But from the legal part, I thought,
Yeah.
from a person that wasn't involved as you folks were,
Mm-hmm.
that's what struck me.
One of the things I just thought, when I seen the lease from the military back in '64, it's going to end in 2029, August 29th or whatever.
Yes.
Anyway, August 2029.
Yeah.
That's the end of it. I didn't want the same thing to happen to Mākua that happened to Kaho'olawe. Kaho'olawe, they spent $400 million to clean up, and they never did it.
They never completed it. Yeah.
Never completed the task. And what would Mākua look like at the end of the lease. So part of the agreement and the discussion and the negotiations was to try to address some of that. First, we wanted to find out what was there, how bad was it. So the OBOD site, we found that, or we learned dinitrotoluene, DNT, which changes us genetically. It's not only cancer causing, it changes us genetically. So what does that mean to children, childbearing years, as you develop that reproductive
Right.
or the nervous system, how does it affect our community? And these are some of the questions. One of the things that they found in the EIS was that they found arsenic, but they couldn't tell whether it was organic or inorganic. One of them is benign, doesn't bother us, and the other one is deadly poison. So which one is it?
Right.
Yeah. They
So-
found it in seaweed, and they didn't take that next step to determine if it's organic or inorganic. Inorganic is the real poison.
Well, maybe I can say this then, that they did come up in 2008, I think it was, with a draft EIS.
Yes.
Can you folks comment on what your reaction was to that one? I think it was the one where you talked about 5 phone books.
It was this huge stack. It was incredible, and thick as it was, it didn't answer all the questions that they were supposed to answer.
Yeah.
And one of them is this issue of what kind of arsenic is in that limu, and another is just the marine study in general, what's out there in the ocean that people use. And then the third one, as I recall, was the archaeological, subsurface archaeological testing, that if they didn't find something on the surface, they didn't go ahead and test. But they may have missed something, so they need to catch up on that. And those are the things they need to do. Now, unfortunately, and I think unfortunately, the military had decided it was okay, and they did what they call a record of decision.
And that was what year? I mean,
I think it was in '09 that they did it. It was either '09 or '10.
when they put out the draft EIS in 2008, was there agreement? I mean, how did it was, so they presented, and what was the reaction? Was there a legal reaction to that?
Yes, there is. There has been. Yes, in that Earth Justice has appealed that it's not complete, and went to Judge Mulway, who again ruled mostly in our favor, that the Army had to do, especially the marine studies, the LIMO study, and the archaeological subsurface testing. So they're determining. Well, the Army knows it has to do it, but it's refusing to take back the record of decision.
Yeah.
And
So
we say you shouldn't have a record of decision if you're not done with the study yet.
So, in other words, it was found to be deficient,
Yes.
but they still, in 2009, I guess, 2009, submitted a final EIS.
Yes.
Or what they
a
think is the final.
Yeah.
And they called it a record of decision.
Decision is the name that when you have the final.
Okay. But they had passed the 2004 deadline.
Yes, they had. They haven't trained for 8 years. And what's interesting is that every year the military has to certify that its troops are adequately, if not superiorly trained, because they've been sent to Iraq and Afghanistan and so on, and they've been certified that they're okay. So they've had their training, they've been able to train. And the question, we've always said that you don't need Mākua, that Mākua is an inappropriate place to train because of all the endangered species, all the archaeological cultural sites, contamination, etc. And for years the Army was saying, no, Mākua is essential. But something changed about a year ago.
Yeah.
Something changed, and that was General Mixon first proposed that they didn't need Mākua for live fire training. He wanted to do some other types of training. And then the general that succeeded him, General Ruzynski, has said that they don't need to do live fire training anymore, and they plan not to do anymore. He left himself an out unless there's a national emergency. But basically, they're not even going to do this other training that they were going to do.
So we've progressed.
Yes, it's progress.
It's progress.
We've progressed a lot.
Right.
Yes.
Growing up, my grandmother lived on Upena Street, and that's just a few miles away from Mākua. And I remember her house when we'd be sleeping there, and one of the bombs would go off, and the windows would rattle, the house would shake, and wake us up from a dead sleep. And this was miles away. So over the last 8 years, we haven't had to experience this battle, this war environment.
Yeah.
And our community has been used as a training scenario for decades.
Right.
And there was one incident when I was right out in front of this building, and I noticed that a convoy was going by. They had a machine gun loaded on top of their Humvee, and they were tracking the people that were walking. This mother and her 3 kids, and he was aiming his machine gun at. And I was talking to some of the other people in the community, said, oh yeah, I was driving down the road and they were aiming at me. So when I talked to the major, what is this? And he says, well, any community that we're in, we use our community in our training scenarios. That's part of our training. I said, I'm a Vietnam vet. I don't want to have to experience having a gun aimed at me, because I was taught, you're going to aim it at me, you're going to shoot me. So I don't want to have to relive those kinds of things. And I don't think anybody in our community should be exposed to that.
Especially the children.
Yeah, I mean,
No.
you're absolutely right. I didn't experience that, but I would feel the same way. And I've also told that, you know, you don't aim a gun at anybody unless you're going to shoot.
Yeah.
And as you are a Vietnam vet, I am a Korean vet. So here we are. People are surprised to hear that, you know, we want to see Mākua returned and training live fire at least stopped, and we are vets. We value peace.
Yes.
Right. Excellent.
So one of the things, you know, a lot of the things that came out of the settlement agreement comes a lot from our history. Exposure to combat situations, exposure to a community of hardship, and constant militarization. So how do we change that for our children? How do we change that environment? And what will our future in Mākua look like? Will we be able to restore it to a pre-military use condition?
Right.
And one of the kumu that I talked to said, why do you want to do this? I said, it's not about my lifetime, but in 7 generations, we will be able to grow uwala there that is safe to eat and have the streams flow again,
Right.
and restore
The
the
springs.
ohia all the way to the ocean,
Yeah.
and the ali'i and the imu again.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
springs, yes.
The springs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And you know, have the endangered species do well. We would like to see them so progress to the point where they're not endangered anymore. And we have some slides of those endangered species. We've already talked about the endangered tree snail, the beautiful tree snail. We can show that again. There's a picture of a group of them and then of one. And then there's the endangered Oahu elapaio that has critical habitat, which is on part of Mākua, and on the ridges above Mākua. And then there's the endangered, you mentioned the haha.
Yeah.
That's a Cyanus superba, and we have a picture of that. And I'm not sure whether the yellow ohia is endangered or not, but it's a beautiful plant and it's quite rare. Kalo isn't endangered, but we had kalo growing in this spring, which we call Mo'opunavai. It was placed there after one of the makahiki, and it liked it there. It grew, and we had several generations.
Yeah.
And then we have the beautiful ohia lehua red blossom, which I think we can show.
They also found several other endangered species. I think there's a daisy,
Yeah.
as
the
well
Mākua
as
daisy.
hibiscus.
Yes, And there's, I think, over 40 now endangered plants total.
Yeah. For the valley. So they found more as this settlement agreement took root and more started happening with the fires. The archaeologists as well as the environmentalists were able to get in there and check out what was going on. The archaeologists found that there was connective activity throughout the valley.
Right. They said they found temples and
Yeah.
more
House
house
sites.
structures.
Yeah.
Right.
Which means that the valley as a whole is an archaeological district, and not just that there's a spot here and a spot there, but it's
And a historic one.
yes.
That I think Hawaii it would see as great value if it was restored to
Right.
the pre-contact, to have that natural environment restored and experienced.
Right.
I would like to see that little kipuku that's on the top of the mountain with all native species there extended throughout the entire valley.
Right.
Yeah.
And more public, the community access.
Yeah, that's a beautiful
People, yeah.
kipuka. It's
Yeah.
on Ohikilolo Ridge. It's beautiful.
Well, that's one thing about when I was in Vieques, I went to one of the sites that was turned over by the military, and it was turned over not to the community or to the country, it was turned over to Fish and Wildlife.
Oh.
So fences were set up, and it was a live fire range. So beyond a fence, and the sign says no trespassing, unexploded ordnance, there was a bomb sticking out with the tail fins in an environment that was now a refuge for the birds, the plants to restore itself. But these environments was exposed to all this unexploded ordnance and the contamination that goes along with it.
Right.
So it seems like Fish and Wildlife and the Army and the military, their theory for getting rid of contamination is the, what do they call that now? Dilution is the solution
Oh.
for pollution.
But there has to be continued ordnance removal.
There
right?
has to be,
Yeah.
and one of the visions that we have
They
from
should
Mākua
start.
is to make it a world-class center for the latest and safest type of unexploded ordnance removal, UXO removal. And we have that vision for Mākua eventually.
Maybe one day, Leandra says the University of Mākua.
Right.
Yes, she
And
does.
if we can turn it into an educational center, turn it into an economic engine where these kinds of exploration can happen, even a
Yes.
restoration of the environment to make it productive and life-giving again.
Yeah.
I think would be valuable and exportable as a commodity throughout the world.
I think it would be very
Wonderful.
great. And you know, reforestation. Reforestation could bring back the streams, the water, and would certainly help the valley. So that's another vision that we have, reforestation. And of course, there's the cultural aspect.
Well, that I listened to David Henkin's piece that you can get access to on earthjustice.org.
Right.
And he was talking about all of the legal aspects, but two things that really stood out for me, besides the settlement agreement, was the incorporation of culture and the archaeological sites as being a component of the entire suit.
Right.
So the access that we have, that
Yes.
Fred coordinates every, twice a month, or the makahiki that we practice, and we get a chance to sleep overnight. So these experiential opportunities where we go and touch the ground and smell the air and
Right.
just sort of experience Mākua
Right.
without all of the turmoil going on.
Yeah, I felt like it was almost like an education for David too, from the community telling him it's not just the endangered birds and plants, it's the people and connection and being part of the valley. It's all one rather than pieces. And that each time he litigated, he had to
It
keep that in.
influenced.
Yeah,
Mākua has had
So
an
that's a
influence on all
very-
of us, I believe.
Yeah,
very good
really.
description.
Well, one of the things I mentioned earlier at the previous segment was first getting involved in Mākua was they couldn't help us because they could only help with endangered species,
Right.
plants and animals. But the Hawaiians were, I feel, are endangered species because of the disconnect from the land
Right.
and the resources. But I also realize that the plants and animals that are endangered are also the voiceless Hawaiians that were here before. And they also need to be protected and considered. So one of the things I learned with the Army doing training in the fires, they would call it mitigation. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Well, we can lose maybe 10% of the population and they'll still survive.
Oh.
And I view that as a slow choke. You know, you choke somebody just enough, you let go before they die. And our community has been exposed to that for years. And you know, Fred
Yeah.
has really done magic working with the different groups that have gone in to experience Mākua and the cultural access component, because they get a chance to see
Just
not
to
only
just to experience the, I
Yeah.
think Fred puts it. What do you say? The
Well,
valley is its best.
best argument.
Say
You know,
that
just
again.
just being in the valley is the best way to let people know that it's a really, really special, sacred place. If they can experience the valley, you know, just about everybody comes out in favor of, yeah, this is not a good place to train. It's a place that we need to preserve. Yeah.
I think you briefly told me how you got involved. What started you being interested in Mākua?
Yeah. Well, I, as many people may know, I'm a retired physician, family physician, and I worked in pain medicine and so on. But when I came to Hawaii, I came here to intern at St. Francis Hospital. And this is, you know, like Civil War days. This is 1961. I'd passed through Hawaii earlier on the way back from my tour of duty in Korea and Japan. And I fell in love with the place. But I came here, so when I was interning at St. Francis, a group of doctors decided to take us out over Christmas vacation to have a nice picnic on the beach. And the beach happened to be Mākua Beach. And when I saw Mākua and the beach, I felt a special connection to it. I don't know what it is, but the feeling was strong. And I'd keep coming back, and I keep experiencing the fires that they had and recording it. And so I just naturally fell into being with Sparky and a very good group that we have, and just trying to free Mākua.
Great. And
Yeah.
and Sparky, you mentioned healing, the healing part of
Yes.
Mākua. I've heard that before from others. Did you want to comment any further on?
Well, Fred mentioned Kahana Haiki, and one of the translations for that was a place of a turning point, place of change, and that's the part of the valley that I spend more of my time on. Mākua means parent. Koiahi is a small sliver, but normally each ahupua'a would have the ability to sustain itself. So it's really unusual that Koiahi was a very small section of that entire 3 ahupua'a area being able to sustain itself. You look at it today and it doesn't seem that way, but we have not been able to get in there on a regular basis to really get a feel of what it was like. And in fact, Koiahi, the Kuleana properties on the maps that still show the Kuleana properties, there's one that comes out of that valley.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. But the healing part you felt was more stronger in Kahanekahiki?
Well, that's where I gravitated to. And there's a small pond there, and some of the old timers would call it leper pond.
Oh.
And
Hansen's disease.
Hansen's
pond.
disease. Yeah, well, that's
'Cause there's a
poor
connection.
choice. So,
Yeah.
but this is one of the places that they would come from Kahimohalu to get into the ocean, because they would lose body parts because there was no sensation, and they would go there. So that's one of the things that would happen. And it was just a sense of healing there. The area that Pond is was also called La'ihao, and from what some of the things I've read was that is where the children of the Li'i were raised. Just beyond that was a spring, a Li'i spring, that would provide fresh water and a bath. So just on that one section,
Right.
that's just a little history that I've been able to find over the years.
Yeah.
But also, part of it, my wife and I, our time there was to work on healing our relationship and our family. So that's why we were there. And over the years, it has done magic.
Oh, great.
That is
Wow.
good, and I'm glad you brought in the fact that Hansen's disease people would go out there for a number of reasons. The healing is a very important reason, but it's also, at least during the time that Hale Mahalo was around, it was much more isolated. They could enjoy themselves even though they may have been deformed in some ways. And my friend Bernard Punikaya, God rest his soul, he's deceased, but he's a wonderful person. He supported our efforts in Mākua. And he used to tell me how they'd go out there. So it just brought back memories, and I appreciate that.
Well, we had talked earlier about the kupuna, and we were going through a list of names.
Yeah, that's right. We should mention them.
Ivanhoe
Naivi, very important. I knew Ivanhoe during the Ohiki-Lolo struggle, when they wanted to put a golf course in a country club or whatever there, and we fought to preserve that, and were able to do that because a heiau site was discovered. And so that fortunately never happened, but I got to know Ivanhoe then, and he was taken away from us way too soon. But then others, Walter Kamana has been mentioned, Jay Landis, wonderful person, great friend, great supporter of Mākua. Charlie Rainey, former cowboy that worked in Mākua. What a great guy. I mean, he was just wonderful. He was a former patient. I don't think he'd mind telling us, but he's also passed. Frenchie, Auntie Frenchie Di Soto. Auntie Frenchie Di Soto. We do miss her.
Yes.
She was a wonderful guide, a wonderful helper, a great spirit, a very earthy person, but with a huge heart. And I can't say enough good about Auntie Frenchie. And although I don't know all of them very well, there is the Mākua Cemetery group. And they actually, I know one time members of that group came to our Easter sunrise, well, Mākua sunrise service or celebration. And they are doing the things. They've restored the cemetery to a great extent. They're wonderful people.
They've done a wonderful job.
Yeah,
Beautiful
really
job.
great job. So there's been Kapuna and young people and Makahiki group that gets together and practices every year and is really good with the chants.
And I gotta thank Marion Kelly. She's the
Oh,
one that
yeah, of
really got
course.
me on this journey,
Of
along with
course.
Ed
Of course.
Greavy and you know, all of the people that live there.
Right.
The homeless or the houseless.
Yes.
You know, 80–90% of them were Hawaiian or part Hawaiian, and the traditional living or the healing part was being in the ocean, near the ocean, and that's one of the things that we're really not allowed to do. That self-sustaining ability.
Right.
When you're surviving off the land, you don't really need to know how to read or write. You don't need to have an income, but you need to be productive. And I don't think there were anybody there in the group that we were working with that were not productive. They worked hard at staying alive, feeding their kids, and trying to do the right thing for what they had, the circumstance. But over the years, I found that homelessness has become more criminalized by ordinances or laws that are passed to not allow certain things. And there was something interesting. One of the testimony that this admiral gave in D.C., and it was about how the people are encroaching on their military training activities.
Gosh.
And the reverse happened with the group that I was with, the homeless group that got me started in Mākua, because they were the ones that were
Right.
looking, they wanted to do training, and yes,
You
they
have to
were
clear.
encroaching on their activity and their
Yes.
access to their training
That's
area.
good insight.
Yeah,
That's a really
it's
good
incredible that they would turn that around.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you mentioned Ed Greevy is a great photographer. And then, of course, what's his name? The one who did the beautiful Makahiki picture.
Jan Beckett.
Jan Beckett, I'm sorry. I'm having a whatever moment. But yes, Jan has been a great supporter. He's really been a big help to us. And then getting back to Marion Kelly, were you on the Access where she came out in December of, not 11, but 2010? Or was it
I don't know.
11? There was, no, I think it was 2000, it was 2010. She, well, a good friend of hers is Ula Hassiger, who comes out to help us, and of course Lynette Cruz.
Yep.
We mustn't forget Lynette, former member of the board, now emeritus. But Ula was very good friends with Marion, and when Marion was suffering with the terrible disease of Alzheimer's, she went to visit and she mentioned Mākua, and Marion Kelly smiled. She obviously reached her, and Ula said, "Would you like to go back and visit Mākua?" And she was just so happy. Couldn't talk, couldn't walk at that point, but was obviously happy. So they actually got her down, Marion Kelly's daughter, Ula, and my grandson Daniel, holding her up before the petroglyph rock, the Ki'ipohaku.
Yeah.
And she was in seventh heaven. And that was probably less than a year before she died. But she,
that's
Marion
right.
Kelly, was an incredible person, and her monographs on Mākua are so valuable, so beautiful.
And I hope you don't mind, this
No,
kind of
not
leads
at
me
all.
to another thought.
Yes.
All
think-
of these kupuna have passed on,
Mm-hmm.
that we mentioned,
Yeah.
and they passed the baton to us. Some willing, some unwilling.
Unwilling.
So Mākua has a way of doing this. And, you know, eventually we're going to have to pass the baton on to the
Right.
next generation. So how will Mākua look? And it's going to depend on everybody that contributes. And if you listen with your heart, Mākua will be able to talk to you. But if you listen and you talk through this, then it's lost in translation because you don't really hear what's going on.
Right.
And one of the things that happens for us is the ho'ailono, the natural event, whether it's a rainbow. There was a time that I seen, it was a multi-centric rainbow.
Yeah, I remember that.
Oh.
And it was, I think, 4 or 5 in a circle. It was amazing. I'd
Yeah,
never
it was.
seen anything like that before.
It was.
Several times we could see Kauai,
Mm-hmm.
where the image of the island is so vivid.
Yeah.
And it was always around a troubled event, something that we were working through, and we would have these
Wow.
Ho'ailono.
things that
That's
would say,
wonderful.
keep going, you guys are okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's been, you said 8 years.
No live fire training
Right.
with the promise that we are not going to have any more live fire training in Mākua.
So, are there any last thoughts? I think I got what you think might be a good vision, but are there any last thoughts about Mākua?
Well, we invite people who are listening or have heard about it to come out and experience Mākua for yourself. As Sparky has said, there's always messages. I've been in Mākua now hundreds of times, or over 100 times, I should say, and I always learn something on every access. There's always something that reaches, and almost everybody that goes there experiences that too. So come and check it out.
Yeah. And one of the experiences that I've had over the years dealing with the military, and there have been people that were really bad people.
In the military.
in the military, and how they treated the community and how they just,
Yeah.
their attitude, their arrogance. But there's also been the other side, the other face of that coin. Within the same group, there have been exceptional people
Yeah.
that we've dealt with.
Yeah.
And there's parts of the military, the environmental group, that have really worked really hard
Yes.
to protect the environment and make it better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's
so
right.
this partnership, although it's been adversarial from time to time, has also been a really good partnership.
Yep.
I think. I believe they've learned how to be more culturally appropriate from
Right.
us. And when they would go to a foreign country, those that were open were able to translate that.
Yeah.
Those that were not maybe had a much more difficult time. So I think we brought more of a cultural awareness to them that they may not have had before, but also an environmental awareness.
Right.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people that they would Hawaiians that would take people there to do training, that would use their gunships to blow things up, and they were the ones actually doing it. Now they're coming back and they're looking at their actions differently
Yeah.
and the impacts of that. But we go through that in everyday life, or the things that we do have an impact. There's
Right.
a price to pay
Yeah.
for whatever it is.
Yeah.
So the community has grown. We've learned as a community. I had one of the uncles say, "Boy, what are you doing? These guys have been feeding us for all of these years." I said, "Yeah, but uncle, the pollution that they're leaving there is going to kill us. And if not me, my kids or my grandkids or great-grandkids or the kids that have not even
Right.
been thought of, the future, what will we look like?" So I think it's important for us to learn about what's going on. And initially, it was like the rogue elephant, army going through through the jungle, doing whatever they want, and there was nothing we could do. So the goal as Mālama Mākua was to be the mosquito,
Right.
to give them an itch that they would have to stop and scratch. And I think we've been able to do that.
Yes.
Even more.
Maybe
you-
more.
And you mentioned ex-military coming back. I guess we could consider ourselves ex-military, but we actually have a retired colonel who has been very helpful to us. I'm going to mention his name, Joe Astores, and he's discovered his Hawaiian heart, as he states, and he's been very helpful. And also want to mention that one of the good military guys, do you remember when General Dubik in midweek actually stated for the public that he thought Mākua ought to be returned to the Hawaiians?
Yeah.
And I have his signed, I had him sign that thing. But here's a 2-star general, and probably more now if he's not retired, whose heart was in the right place. And so we've had good people, as you say.
Yeah, and it just comes to mind Easter Sunrise Service. One of the tank commanders who was part of PAO ended up bringing his family
That's true.
to experience Mākua
Excellent.
in a way that he had never before.
That's
'Cause
true.
he was that interface between us and
Yeah.
the hardcore guys
Yeah.
at our very beginning. And it's just the way that Mākua, that healing part,
Right.
has helped a lot of us. And I think even the guys that I may say are really hard guys, I think they gain something from it as well.
Excellent.
And you know, we have to give credit to General Mixon, who started the idea, and General Rosinski, who said, "Hey, we're not going to do live fire training anymore." So
Yeah, hope that lasts forever.
yeah,
So there's
we want
been
it to
no live
last.
fire training in Mākua for 8 years and probably never. So thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Very much for
Thank
coming.
You.
I really appreciate you.
Thank you for your interviewing
Yeah.
skills.
Thank you.
Mahalo.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha, everyone.
Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. They're going down Mākua, bring ho kupu and pray. They're going down Mākua, bring ho kupu and pray. Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Take my hand and follow, this road is long and slow. Take my hand and follow, this road is long and slow. Tutu, when I get there, oh, what gifts shall I bring? Tutu, when I get there, oh, what gifts shall I bring? Come with aloha aina and a song to sing. Come with aloha aina.